Okay, Muckle Chapter 8, Part 7, and I hope this is the end of it. And I hope if you got the email later tonight and you look and you realize he got all of Chapter 8 on there. Yes, I did, just for you. So don't worry, go ahead, tell me what you thought about the videos. Oh, right. We were talking about emic versus edic, and we're talking about beliefs and practices and how they conflict. So basically, there's two additional stages between ideal and real. The cultural ideal is what insiders think they ought to do. Real is what people actually do, as measured by direct scientific observation. In between, we have two different kinds of perceived realities. There's the emically perceived reality, what insiders think that they and others do actually do, despite their best intentions. And then there's edically perceived reality, what a technically trained observer thinks the group actually does. And so if you were going and doing your survey down there in Hamilton from street to street, and you're asking people, what should you do about getting married and the babies? And they say, oh, yeah, you should get married first. And then you say, yeah, but who actually does that? They'd be like, probably only half the people do it. And then you go to the next house and you're like, what do you think? And they're like, not quite half, maybe like 40%. And you go to another house down the next street and they're like, oh no, like the majority, like 60, 70% of people having babies before they get married. And you just want to know, so that's your emically perceived reality. These are just ordinary people, members of the community, what they think based on their own experience. And you can find people who are technically trained, who have different kinds of knowledge, and you could ask a couple different kinds of people for information on this. And I always ask this question in the class, who do you think knows about this? And people have different ideas. And eventually I say, what about babies? Oh yeah, and then we think, oh yeah, OBGYN. So you go to a baby doctor and you ask them, when the people have the babies, are they married or are they not married? You know, and the baby doctor's not going to know, right? They don't ask every time, and it's not really any of their business, and they don't care. But just based on their sort of gut, they're going to say, yeah, probably about 30, 40%, right? Between 30 and 40%. Uh, right? It's going to be a lot more precise. It's not going to be so wide. You ask this baby, this OBGYN, they're going to say 30 to 40%. You ask that one over there, they're going to say 30 to 40% too, right? Because they actually like have seen dozens and dozens of babies being born and have some sense of the ones where they know where there's marriage or not marriage, what the status of the biological parents were. And the other person that you're going to find this information out is at the marriage, right? So the priest or the preacher or whoever's marrying these people, the judge who marries people, knows if they produced a baby first or haven't yet produced any babies, right? When they get them married. Sometimes um, they don't know, they don't care, but they still observe and they'll have an idea, and you'll probably find that instead of it varying widely between 40% and 60%, the pastors are all going to say, between about 25 to 35%, or whatever. They're going to come up with um, numbers that are more precise and narrow, and probably closer to the actual measurement, which you do. Then you go out, you do your sampling in your survey, and you find out that it's actually 23.8% or whatever. Random sample. You got to sample that population randomly. If all members of a tribe might be listed, if there's only 290 people there, and then you use a table of numbers to select 12 of them randomly to ask them for an interview. I'm not sure what I was going to say there. If it's a bigger population, then you can't have everyone in you can't have a list of all 338,463,927 Americans that currently exist. But you can go to the phone book and you can say, okay, of the people in Hamilton, uh, this specific sample represents them, maybe. And so you can take a random number table and go pick out 55 of them to call or something. Judgment sample. The anthropologist decides whom to ask for an interview. So you don't necessarily have to always do a random sample. You could say, well, I don't want to ask random people. I want to ask this specific people. I want to get key informants, very knowledgeable members of the community about a certain topic. If your interest is in events that took place 50 years prior to the community, nobody younger than their late 50s would be a reliable eyewitness. So if you're going to ask about something that happened in the 1970s, you got to look for people who are older than 50 because otherwise they don't know. They weren't around. My earliest memories are from 1979. Prior to that, I don't know. I wasn't there. And even after that, until the late 80s, I'm not really very aware of stuff because I'm a kid. In contrast, the half dozen members who are older than 75 might be very rich sources of information because they were adults when what was going on was happening. Snowball sample. One informant introduces the research to other informants and says, "Hey, you might want to talk to this guy," or "Hey, this guy might want to, you might want to go talk to that anthropologist." Um, it could lead to biased information because friends recommending other friends not necessarily the best way to get a clearer image of what went on because they could all be on the same side, right? We get the gang violence or whatever. Everyone who's sympathetic with one gang is all going to be friends, so they're going to direct you toward that perspective. What we do want to do with all of this is avoid leading questions. The overarching goal in ethnographic interviews is to avoid asking leading or loaded questions. Questions should be open-ended and allow the informant to choose more authentic and appropriate terms. So not good is, why are you doing yard work today? Or who are you making that bread for, right? That assumes that you're doing yard work. That assumes that you're making bread. Even worse, that you're making bread for someone and not just out of the goodness of, the joy of doing the bread. So it's better to walk up to someone and say, tell me about what you're doing right now. Open-ended, and then it's free to them to say, oh, I'm making bread versus I'm meditating versus I'm, doing chemistry or whatever they see their bread as. Code of ethics. Anthropologists' first allegiance is to the people who have welcomed them in their communities. They must not lie to these people or hurt them in any way. If they do that, they are not being good anthropologists. This can be a very difficult task, especially when anthropologists work with people who are not good people, people who are doing bad things. Anthropologists have successfully done field work with drug dealers who do beatings to other drug dealers or to their subordinates or whatever. And it's really, really hard. You got to figure out some basic ground rules for when you say, hey, I am not hanging out anymore. I don't want to hear about this. I'm going to go somewhere else. Please stop talking about the crimes you've been committing. So you gotta have some boundaries with the group, but you gotta have your main people whose side you're on are the people you're working with. It's sort of like a journalist. Like a journalist has a responsibility to get the story, even if they have to get people to admit to crimes. But it's much tighter. A journalist doesn't have a lot of close relationships with their informants. They ask them for information and then they move on. Anthropologists, we live with these people. They invite us into their lives. We owe them a whole lot more than just anonymity in a story. Digital ethnography. Digital ethnography is done every day by Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter. If you're online and it's free, you are not the customer, but you are the product, and someone is doing work on you. So why not do some of it yourself and get some credit for it? Applied anthropology. Why not get paid for doing anthropology? Plenty of people do. Applied anthropology can be done in business, organizational behavior, and marketing consumer behavior. So how the company works versus how we sell stuff to customers. Development anthropology by development organizations doing work usually abroad. Environmental or resource-based anthropology, doing cultural resource management, trying to figure out the impact, the social impact assessment of mining going in on a community somewhere in the Amazon. Medical anthropology is very common. Our current person in Ohio here does Amy Acton is a almost like a medical anthropologist. She does public, global public health. Global health was her. She was a professor of global health at Ohio State before she started running our Ohio Public Health Department of Public Health. Social policy issues, education, tourism, indigenous peoples, and native corporations. A lot of anthropologists doing a lot of field work up there and getting paid to do it. Technology. Intel, the microchip manufacturer, apparently at one time employed more PhD anthropologists than any university in the world. Microsoft also hires a lot of them. And finally, we had a little section there on participatory action research. If you don't want to get paid very much, but you do want to help change the world, you can do anthropology in the service of the group who wants help in achieving their goals. This is more activist and more critical. It's decolonial. It's beyond a research agenda or even a development model. The goal is to help empower people who have been disempowered. We had an anthropologist at Miami University recently who worked in Central America, and his goal there was to help people disrupt national development projects, mainly Italian electricity manufacturers who were trying to build huge dams in their community, which would flood their homes and not really give them very much. They would have to move to a new village up on the side of the mountain just to provide more electricity for the big city, miles and miles and miles away. And so they're, the goal of the people there is just like, hey, we got to kill this dam. We got to stop it from ever being built. And the anthropologist is like, okay, great. How can I help you do that? Not making any money, but changing the world for those people. Okay? So there we have it, cultural anthropology, Muckle, chapter 8.